Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Horror Analysis. With me, Drew. Hi there. Today, we're continuing with the history of horror. And we are continuing, of course, teaching it backwards. Backwards from today. Back in time, decade by decade, period by period. Obviously, when we get past 1950, we're going to go with chunks rather than decades. And we're going to slip out of Stephen King stuff into Lovecraft stuff, and then it gets even weirder because it gets weirder. Because we're not dealing with King anymore, we're dealing with Lovecraft, so things are going to get weirder. But of course, now we're still in general times where people have reference the 2000s, pre-2010. Most of the audience out there, most of you audience members will have a decent reference of that. Unless you're watching this 30 years in the future, in which case, hi, 30 years in the future. Alright. Oh, I'm not organized. You over here, with this and this and this. Okay, did I have a point with... Okay, yes, I did. We're off to a great start, aren't we? Okay, yes. So, 2010 back to 2000, or the 2000s is... I'm not going to go purely back year by year. That's ridiculous. I showed this slide last time. This is from the video that had some history of horror in it. The 2000s, what Josh Howard, the guy at the bottom, and that's his YouTube video that, where this comes from, which was a philosophy of horror lecture he did at his college. Well, he might be a student there, or he might be a professor there. I'm not sure. It wasn't the best video. He's interrupted a lot. And he's, when he's interrupted, he's trying to have some banter with the people, but you can only hear him just because it's a video. It's a slideshow. But he does have some interesting clips on there, and I don't know how to show clips on my thing, so, some of the stuff is there, and he does go over the psychology of horror. So if you're interested in psychology of horror and you don't want to watch, well, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to talk about it. But if you want to watch someone talk about it, you can go and check out that video. It's kind of long. It's an hour long, but considering that I've been talking for quite a while, all told, I've been trying to cut it into 40-minute chunks. We're doing a 40-minute video a day. But the 2000s, what he's talking about here, he calls it a hodgepodge. A lot of torture movies, the advent of the torture movies, torture films, the Saw sequels, the Hostel, the Collector, the Collection, there, good. I had a cuticle that was annoying the crap out of me. I had to bite it off. My apologies. And then remakes, lots and lots of remakes. And I went over a lot of them yesterday, and I don't have that page up. Oh shoot. Okay, well I'm gonna grab that real quick. A lot of remakes, like Halloween was remade, Last House on the Left was remade. History of horror notes. Amityville Horror, Hills Have Eyes, Black Christmas, My Bloody Valentine, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Evil Dead, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Last House on the Left, Halloween, The Thing, Fright Night. Whoa, that was weird. Dawn of the Dead, Prom Night, Willard, etc. I'm going to minimize that one now. I'm going to get rid of that. Okay. Notes. That's that. Also, we're going into Stephen King's territory because his new version of Danse Macabre was released, or was published in 2010, which is the end of this, and his essay, What's Scary, is talking about the recent developments in horror. Obviously, I have this, but I have it on audiobook. I have the old version of Danse Macabre, because that's how I bought it. I think I bought it in 2007, so I didn't have the option. And the 2000s is also where we get into Stephen King's post-accident years. Most people know that Stephen King was hit by a car in '99. I used to think, I still kind of think, that altered his writing, or that trauma was, elements of that trauma was shown in his writing. I think it less than I used to. I used to think that he lost some of his editing skill, because his books tend to run a little bit longer or feel a little bit longer after the accident, but I don't think that's fair. I still think it a little bit, but not as much as I thought it a year ago. In newer Stephen King books, I find myself tending to skim over certain sections. It was the it's the second longest, really. It was. This is great. Wikipedia has the bibliography of Stephen King, which I printed out, and it has the page numbers and has the years of release. So it's actually pretty helpful for me, because I'm going year by year, or decade by decade. So it was 1986, so we'll talk about it later in a different video. It was 1,142 pages. The Stand uncut, which is how I recommend reading The Stand. I might want to go back and read the regular abridged version. But I'm glad I read the uncut version at least once, so I would recommend the uncut version. That's 1152, so 10 more pages than it. Regular The Stand was 800 pages, so not a short book either. But his post-accident stuff, I found myself skimming in Cell. I found myself, Cell I read an audiobook. Under the Dome I read an audiobook. Doomickey I read an audiobook. Lizzy's Story I read an audiobook. And I find myself not the audiobook version of skimming, which would be sort of drifting off into your own thoughts while listening, which I don't do in his earlier work. Not often, but occasionally. Under the Dome I read an audiobook. What else is on here? Black House I didn't notice any difference really. But that also might be a Peter Straub thing because he co-wrote it. Cell, Lizzy's, Blaze I read, but I don't. It's a Richard Bachman book. It's not a horror book either, so I can't really discuss it too much. If you're a liberal, you're gonna love Blaze. Oh my goodness, it's such a left-wing book. It's so good. I'm liberal, so I don't care. If you're a Republican or you're conservative anyway, you're gonna hate Blaze. You're wrong to. It's such a lefty book. It's so good. Doomickey, I read on audiobook. Under the Dome, read on audiobook. From a Buick 8, I read on audiobook. That was the first one that seemed a little tiny bit um, needed a tad bit more on the editing. He needed to kill some more children, as he likes to put it. And of course, on writing he wrote during that time as well. That was really his inspiration for writing On Writing, which is a book about writing, his other nonfiction book. I highly recommend it if you're interested in writing. I don't think it works for everybody because he doesn't plan anything, which is ridiculous for me. The amount of notes I have on this and the amount of notes I have on all my fiction stuff is ridiculous. It's the only way I can write. But he doesn't know how anything's going to happen until it happens, until he types it, which is marvelous. It's a marvel, literally. I don't know. But then again, he loves Harry Potter series, and J.K. Rowling had that planned out, had Book 7 planned out before she wrote page 1 of Book 1. So he obviously doesn't mind when people write the other way, the polar opposite way of how he writes. But it's a good book, good on creativity as well. And he loves Rule 13, which I used to think he gave up on Rule 13 after the accident. I don't think he did. I think probably the first draft of Under the Dome, which is his longest post-accident, 1074 pages, was probably 2,000 pages or something. It probably was much, much longer. And I don't think you could cut much of Under the Dome. I got the audiobook here. Definitely good. Actually, I think the reader was pretty good. Raul Esparza. Good reader. Lizzy's story was also a very tight read. These aren't necessarily horror. I wanted to go back to Under the Dome, and I'll try to go back to Under the Dome. Or I'll forget, in which case, oh well. Yes. From a BOK, not horror, dark alien fantasy, which is what he's great at. Lizzy's story, not horror, dark fantasy. Blaze, not horror, crime. Sort of, not even really supernatural. Interesting. Very left wing. Good story. It's a Richard Bachman book. If you're reading Richard Bachman, you better be a liberal because he's going to piss you off otherwise. Doomickey, Ghost Story, Haunted Island, creepy as fuck. Pardon me, I was cursing. I'm trying to not do that, but it was. Oh my. Zombie pirates, or ghost pirates, I suppose, but physical. So zombie pirates. Haunted. It's a haunted key. It's a haunted island. Under the Dome. Dark sci-fi. Aliens take over I guess I'm talking about it now. Aliens put a huge impenetrable dome over a town in Maine. And presumably watched them as they destroy each other because, that's what happens. It's a very claustrophobic feeling book, and it's very good. I think that he not stole the idea. I think he absorbed the idea from a few things, and made it his own. And the making it his own is how I'm saying it's not a theft or a intellectual plagiarism or anything like that. He made it his own. Just as you can say that he did for Between Carrie or Firestarter is what he did with Stranger in a Strange Land and the mind control-y fiction from earlier, making it darker, making it his own, owning it, and he synthesized it into something that is his own, and he does, and no one's accusing him of making a dark version of no one calls Carrie a dark version of Stranger in a Strange Land. But you could, and you wouldn't be all that far off. But I'm not calling it plagiarism in any way, shape, or form. Let's make that straight. Under the Dome was written in 2009, so definitely in our realm of talking here. One of my favorite science fiction, fantasy, alternate history series. It's called 1632 by Eric Flint. You could say that Under the Dome was a synthesization, a darkening, pardon me, of 1632. In Under the Dome, a small town gets trapped under an impenetrable dome. In 1632, a ring of fire takes a small town and traps it in 1630s Germany, a small West Virginia town from year 2000, when the first book was published. I think it was published in 2001, but it takes place. It's published in 2000, and it takes place in 2000, and goes back to 1632's Germany. 1630s Germany, 1631 for the first book. And then there's many, many, many sequels. I recommend the whole series. It'll just take up. I recently reread them, like last year. I essentially read nothing but that, and it took me over a year to read them all again. There's a lot of books in the series. 1632, 1633, 1634, and there's 4 1634 books. There's 5-ish 1635 books, and a few 1636 books. Plus there's another series called Ring of Fire that's also based on that book. There's another series called Grantville Gazette that's also based on that book. There's about 4 Ring of Fire books now, and 7 published Grantville Gazettes, and 40-something online. And I haven't even read all the ones online. Yeah, so that will take up a lot of your time. I recommend it, though. It's time well spent. But the idea of town cut off from everything they know is in both. I'm not even sure if Stephen King has heard of Eric Flint. I would think he heard of him. I don't know if he's read 1632. And it's also the work of aliens in both cases. In 1632, it really doesn't matter. The alien part, the introduction, is the only alien part you hear about. And it's the weakest chapter in the book, actually. But Stephen King, when he does it, he makes it much darker, of course. They can communicate with the outside world. They just can't get to the outside world. They're stuck in the dome. And there's a lot of neat environmental stuff that goes on, as well as, of course, the personal relations, which is what 1632 is also all about, personal relations of the people in that are trapped, and how they're communicating with the people on the outside that can't get them out. And in Under the Dome, the aliens that are controlling this dome are looking at the people like an alien ant farm. And I think Stephen King probably heard the band name, if not the band itself, called Alien Ant Farm. Most famous for their cover of Michael Jackson's Smooth Criminal. Popular quite a few years before Under the Dome was written, or was being written, I guess. And I guess Movies was another one by them. Courageous is another song I know by them. Um, Not a bad little band. Kind of fun. But the idea of Alien Ant Farm, that's not something you usually think of, but apparently both this band did 5 years before Stephen King read the book. I think the I don't think the band's suing Stephen King anytime soon either. Um, but of course, the band is not writers; they're musicians, and they just had a cool name for a band. So if someone wants to run with that and make a story out of it, that's pretty cool. Um, so maybe Stephen King incorporated these things in his own vision of Under the Dome. Again, I'm not accusing in any way, shape, or form Stephen King of plagiarizing. Don't go further than I'm going. I'm not going into that plagiarism zone. He stops far before plagiarism. It is long, and that's the one you can't cut anything out of. You might be able to cut words here and there out of Duma Key or Cell. Oh, Cell! Cell's a zombie story. It's a odd take on the zombies. That was '06. '06. Yeah, that's definitely a weird take on zombies. It's definitely in the height of zombiness that the 2000s were famous for, along with torture films and remakes. And we're going to talk about that as well when we get into what's scary. Cell's a zombie story. Terrorists somehow put a code in cell phones that if you're listening to a cell phone conversation, either on the cell end or if you're on a landline connected to a cell, there's a beep 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 or some sort of signal sent out, hits your brain, makes you go crazy, and you turn into a zombie, and you start attacking everybody around you. Yeah. So, yeah. So it's a zombie survival story for the first half of the book, and then the zombies start getting weird, flying, group thinking. Yeah, the zombies get weird enough that most people are lost in the story. I still think it's a great story. I still recommend it to people, but most people come back to me after reading it, after my recommendation, and say, you're weird. It was a zombie story to begin with, and then it turns into something weird. I said, of course it turns into something weird. It's the point. So I guess that Duma Key is definitely a ghost story, without a doubt. Or demon controlling ghosts, I guess. It gets weirder after that. From a Buick 8, very dark aliens with some horror elements, definitely. And there's some horror elements in Leesy's story. The depiction of the aliens in Under the Dome is horror-esque, because they look creepy when they're described. Ooh, they do look creepy, don't they? Sort of like Scarecrow from Batman. If the sackcloth that the Scarecrow's face is out of was actually the skinish sackcloth. Potato sacking as face. Kind of creepy. Definitely. It's a little chilly. Of course, I'm describing it crappy, and he describes it great. So let's just leave it at that. And of course, Dance Macabre's reissue had What's Scary. So let's jump into What's Scary, shall we? Oh yeah, I gotta talk about that. But we talk about that in books. We're gonna talk about that in books. Both What's Scary and Josh Howard's take focus on movies. It's a shame because I can't really find a lot of reference on movies. Or on books, because I have to go everywhere looking for it. King talks about a couple of movies from the late 90s, early 2000s. Focusing on 3. Blair Witch Project, which I'll talk about more because it counts as 90. It was done in 99, so it counts in the 90s. I'm not going to do it till next time. But he says that the influence on it is what's important, and it influences that documentary style or the amateurish camera work style has influenced much of today's or the 2000s cinematography and horror stuff. Yeah. The feel of filmmaking from Blair Witch has influenced a lot of today's filmmaking. Now, and also the second one he does talk about a lot is Dawn of the Dead remake, the 2004. He talks about zombies being very big, which they are. Let's minimize that real quick. I thought of something else that I needed to get over. Sorry. So he talks about the zombie-ishness. He sees Dawn of the Dead remake, the 2004 version, the remake of the 1979 version, as the epitome of the zombie novel or zombie movie. And he says it's particularly good because it shows the correlation between zombies and Muslim terrorists, which were the fears of the 2000s. The fears of the 2000s can essentially be zombies on one hand and Muslim terrorists on the other. That's the major fears of the Americans. Dawn of the Dead the opening credits have scenes of zombie plague breaking out, interspersed with scenes of Muslim worshippers bowing towards Mecca in mass, in big groups, which was a disquieting scene for most Americans, as King says. Once again, don't accuse me or King of racism. Neither of us are bigoted against Muslims. We're just saying that Americans during the first half of 2000s were frightened. One of the fears of theirs that was illustrated by Dawn was Muslim terrorists. I'm actually going to Control N. No, I'm not. No. Sorry. Let me look up Dawn while I'm on IMDb. Who's the director? Zack Snyder. Right. Zack Snyder. So let's see. King's illustration of this point is they both have the very most fervent, not regular Muslims, obviously. I'm just talking about terrorists, extremists, those willing to take lives, which are not all Muslims, obviously. They both, the fear of them, I'm trying to be too PC, I should just knock it off. They didn't fear death. You know, the only way we could stop them is to get them before they get us, which was the fear that a lot of people had, and basically led to the invasion of Iraq, the fighting them over here line. So we fighting over there, so we wouldn't have to fight them over here line. Famously given by George W. Bush. You know, that sort of feeling, there was a correlation between, shows a correlation between zombies and the Muslim terrorists that were a big fear for Americans. He talks about, of course, he talks about genius, going to genius perfection, going to pale imitations, going to comedy, is the cycle of the horror. He calls, Night of the Living Dead original 69 rather, the genius, the remake of Dawn, genius perfected. Of course, Shaun of the Dead would be, which was I think the same year as Dawn, so it was pretty quick off the mark. As the comedic version, or he mentions Black Sheep. Black Sheep's not a horror, is not a zombie movie. I guess there's zombie elements of it, but it's a werewolf movie. Sort of. I don't know. There's a plague of sheep, bloodthirsty sheep. You put that in. I guess you could put that in zombies because it's a plague of bloodthirsty people, people-looking things, dead people-looking things. So sheepness, but there's a big werewolf element of that as well, because because they wouldn't go back either. No, I might be instantly disproven by Stephen King here. Jeez, I hate when that happens. I hate when Stephen King proves me wrong 13 years after he made his point. Oh no, 3 years after he's made his point. Sorry. And then Zombieland, which he hadn't seen, but I have. I said, yeah, that's it's a send up. It's a good send up. I don't know if he liked it, but I hope he did. I liked it. It's fun, and it's scary too. It's not making fun of zombies. It's having fun with zombies. That's pretty much it. The third one he talks about is Last House on the Left, which is his genius perfected of the homicidal other. Of course, we know the homicidal other from the Tales of the Hook. Last House on the Left was the slasheriness and the remakiness from that, the other section. Oh, I don't think he had that. I didn't put that clip up, did I? Or not clip, that slide up. As I put this clip up last time, to show you, okay, the 2000s, of course, influenced the 2013s. I should also put up the clip for the slide of the 90s to show how that influenced the 2000s. Of course, from the Josh Howard didn't have a slide for the 90s. I'm paraphrasing these, by the way. He had a slide from the 80s, 90s. I don't know why he didn't divide it further, but as I said, it's probably not a 10-year span. It's probably a 15-year span, or you know, vampires ran from 86 to 98, and then zombies sort of took over around 2003, and I'm going to talk about that when I get into novels. 2003 was the rebirth of the zombie. But his 80s was slashers and sequels, and then vampires. Slashers, of course, ended in Scream. Well, it didn't end in Scream, it continued. Because, of course, there were, Friday the 13th and Halloween were remade in 07. And Halloween was remade in 07. Friday the 13th was remade in 09. Nightmare on Elm Street was remade on 09. And and then Fright Night was remade in 2011, and that's vampires. But it didn't do too well, because I think we're still in our vampire mode. Or didn't do too well because it was not a good movie. Take your pick. Last House on the Left. It's a very disturbing remake of the original, which was 72. And that was by Wes Craven. And Stephen King actually made fun of the original quite a bit. Said it was actually funny when it shouldn't have been, that's not a good thing for a horror movie if it's unintentionally funny. And wasn't scary. It had a bad soundtrack. He kept going on about soundtrack. It's kind of scary. If it didn't give tension. Last House, he talks about, it was just great performances, great scripting, great film work. He just has the one problem with at the end where the guy shoves the bad guy's head in the microwave and turns it on, and you can't do that. Which is a good point. You can't do that. Yeah. Then he goes into, after those three big analysis, he goes through into his list of, hey, check out these movies. They're from the last 15 years. He says the last 15 years. These are the good ones that I recommend. And I don't know why he didn't go back the whole 30 years, so he could go as a pure continuation of Dance Macabre, but he didn't feel the need to, and that's fine. I should have made a slide for this, shouldn't I? Final Destination was the first one he recommended from the... He did in chronological order, which I appreciate. That means that I can just do half the list today and half the list tomorrow. Chronological order, the first one in the 2000s was Final Destination. It's the Grim Reaper versus high school kids, essentially, and they all die in weird ways, which is horrific. Jeepers Creepers, monster hollows out people. It's kind of scary. Mothman Prophecies I hadn't seen. It's spooky, is how he described it. Eight-legged freaks, bunch of spiders running around everywhere, eating everybody. He said it wasn't really scary, but it was fun. 28 Days Later, zombie movie with Blair Witch influence again, because a lot of documentary footage, type stuff. Shaun of the Dead, zombies with horror, but not mocking and not laughing at zombies, laughing with zombies. That hot water didn't last very long. Well, I guess it did. I'm going quite a bit longer than I was hoping to on this. Oh well. Red lights, which is feu rouge. I hate French. I'm not good at French. I hate pronouncing things badly, but which is 04. Homicidal Other again. Saw, which is 04, and Saw 2, which is 05. He mentions torture films as is what Josh Howard. I'm gonna get his name right eventually. Josh Howard calls them. I think King likes them for the same reason he likes Final Destination. Just and he does mention that they're good mysteries. 1 and 2 are good mysteries. So on that end, they are. The Jacket. I hadn't seen The Jacket, so Adrian Brody gets transported into 15 years in the future, and there's claustrophobic things, straitjackets, and putting into a morgue drawer. Kind of weird. Pan's Labyrinth, Guillermo del Toro, which I've talked about Guillermo del Toro yesterday, because he's doing great stuff still. The Descent, one again I haven't seen. And it's one that he said if he wanted to do it longer, the essay longer, he'd want to explore this one further. Women go caving and find a race of subhumans, and in Lovecraftian subhuman terms, they start getting picked off. One would assume. Snakes on a Plane. There's a funny meme out there. I don't know if you guys are after memes. Someone asked what Snakes on a Plane is about, and say unicorns on boats. Snakes on a Plane. It's about snakes on a plane. How about that? The Hitcher, 2007. Sean Bean as the homicidal other. And of course, it's a remake of the 86. Rutger Hauer as the homicidal other. 1408, Haunted Hotel Room. It's another one of Stephen King's. Stephen King does a haunted hotel before. Now he just does a haunted room in a hotel, which is kind of cool. And he had no problem with 1408 as a movie. He had so many problems. Justified as and his criticism of The Shining as a movie is fair. Shining as a movie is still a great movie, but I can see why Stephen King doesn't like it. The Mist, also a Stephen King. About a mist, a haunted mist, I guess? I don't know, it's kind of weird. There's stuff going on. It's another genre bender. Yeah, and that's probably that's 07. There's a few genre benders in here actually. Pan's Labyrinth I think is genre bendy. Funny Games, which is the next one on the list, is genre bendy in the slasher type homicidal other one. Because they don't play by the rules. There's a few genre benders in here. I think Pan's Labyrinth is kind of genre bendy as well. Which I'm hoping that there's going to be more and more genre bending. We don't want as horror fans, we don't want the genre to stagnate. If it does, it's going to lose quality. And we want more originality, so hey, let's go for it. The Ruins was the next one. I own the book, I haven't seen the movie. I haven't read the book yet. It's on my list, but so are thousands of other things. Hopefully I'll be more inspired to read the book. And apparently the author of the book wrote the screenplay for the movie, if I read Stephen King's line about it right, which usually is a good sign. We'll see. And Strangers, which is Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman about the homicidal other as well. And then, of course, chronologically, you have Last House on the Left, homicidal other right after that. Dawn of the Dead was in 2004, which would be before Shaun of the Dead, after 28 Days Later, which would be 28 Days Later would be earliest of the 2000 zombie, would it not? Yeah, I don't see anything earlier on any of my lists. In the book list, genre bending. Okay, so we have David Wong's John Dies at the End, which is 2007. He's the intro. He's one of the intros in the 2000s of a new author, David Wong, and the follow up to it is This Book is Full of Spiders, which was post 2010. Max Brooks, Zombie Survival Guide, was in 2003. Which is a favorite of zombie fans, and World War Z was in 2006. And did I mention yesterday? I found out he's the son of Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft. I did not know that. I was like, wow, that's really cool. Other books in this. John Ajvide Lindqvist. Let the Right One In was his 04 in Swedish, 07 in English, his vampire tale, and then he did a zombie tale right after, Handling the Undead. That's the English one. I don't know what it is in Swedish, of course, which was around 2007, so it's in the zombie genre as well. Dan Wells, John Wayne Cleaver books are in this. I talked about those yesterday, definitely. Chuck. I'm just going to call him Chuck because I'm not going to pronounce his last name right. Polaniak. Fingers crossed that was right. It's not going to be. Famous for Fight Club. I've read quite a few Chuck books. Damned was quite good. That's kind of quasi, not really horror. But it was about life in hell, which is kind of comical. It's comedy horror. But in the online lists of books to read of the last 20 years or whatever, Lullaby keeps popping up. I haven't read Lullaby yet, but I like reading a Polaniak book once a year or so I'm okay with that. I'll probably read Lullaby next on the list. There's so many things on the list. Robert Kirkman. Oh, I didn't put this one up. Aha. Yeah, Robert Kirkman. Most people don't know by name. You should. He's quite instrumental on making the zombie genre what it is today. What it is today, because of his work, The Walking Dead. He's the author of. So, yeah. He started writing that in 2003. So not before. 28 Days Later was before that. Max Brooks might have been before that, or he's tied with Max Brooks as second place. And then Dawn of the Dead remake and Shaun of the Dead in 2004. What else do we have here? Of course, we have. Did I not? Oh yeah, Joe Hill. Heart-shaped box was written during that time. I talked about Horns last time. Horns is fantastic. It's being made into a movie with Daniel Radcliffe, which I can't understand. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. It's been 24 hours and I still can't do it. Guillermo del Toro has written books in this time, and of course he's made lots of movies, such as already mentioned Pan's Labyrinth. Did he do The Orphans, or was that somebody else? I can't remember. But Del Toro's book was out during this time. Other people have written, of course, Kings. I've gone over. Dean Koontz wrote 2 nice series during this time. Odd Thomas series, not very scary, but interesting take. He's the ghost whisperer, Odd Thomas, essentially. It's kind of a weird series. I read the first 3 books and then gave up on it. Odd Thomas. I would recommend the first one, if none of the others. Probably the first 3. If you might get tired of it earlier. The Frankenstein series, he also wrote, Dean Koontz. I recommend the first 3 as well. And then I got tired of them. I was done with them at that point. I didn't want to go into 4 and 5. Prodigal Son. But it was an interesting take on Frankenstein, qua Frankenstein, where Victor Frankenstein's the complete bad guy, and the Frankenstein monster is the complete good guy. It's superhero Frankenstein, but that's okay. I'm okay with that for an interesting, fun read. Other than that, let's see. I don't think I have anything else on the list. No, I don't think I have anything else on the list. Of course, next time we're going to be dropping down to the 90s. We got the second half of Stephen King's list, and then we're going to go into the 90s, the ending of the vampires. And of course the vampires still going on, it's just altered to Twilight. The Stephen King in Dance talking about vampires as sexual surrogates. Now they're love surrogates, romance surrogates. People hate Twilight. I've read the books. I enjoyed the books. I don't necessarily say they're good, but they're fun. I'm going to get rage. People are going to rage at me for saying that. They're not good, but they're fun. And there's lots of fun-ish vampire romance-y type things out there. Or vampire action romance. Werewolf vampire romance, action romance stuff. Patricia Briggs writes a great series, writes a few great series. One of them is, at least has vampires as one of the main characters. For pure romance, I've even read some pure romance in the romance section, vampire stories. What was it? Bartlett? And it's called The Lonely Heart... Broken Heart Vampires. Oh, it's been so long. But I read that series, and it was like 6 books in that series. Not that it takes you more than a day to read the books. But love surrogates as opposed to sex surrogates, as King described them in Dance, in his Tales of the Tarot. So Twilight-y-ish stuff are still going on. So vampires are still out there, just not as horror. Maybe they'll fall away further and then reemerge as something scary in 25 years. Or 10. You can't really tell when these things are going to happen. But next time is going to be getting into some of the vampire stuff. Fright Night was 80s. Interview was 90s. There's a few more. The remake of Dracula was 90s too, so I'm going to have to find that information on that. Oh! One of the movies that I didn't get to, Paranormal Activity, which is, of course, much influenced by Blair Witch in terms of production. And then the sequels, of course, went on and on. That started in this period too, so I should mention it. 2007. So I'll toss that on there, and then I'm going to pretty much call it quits. It's about an hour, which was way too long for this, but that's fine. There's more stuff that I want to go over now. So, and I sort of rambled in places that I didn't mean to. My apologies. This is going to be tomorrow. History of Horror with me, Drew. And horror analysis. Thanks, folks. Have a great night.